So do you think, or what's been happening at TUT, for example, students wanting the university debt to be written off, do you think that that's a reasonable request? And surely the sort of destruction thereafter of property is kind of counterintuitive. I mean, where does the funding ultimately come from?
I think this is where it's not just students. I mean, for instance, I do not have an economics background, so I don't necessarily have a full understanding of how the economics of this country works. What I do know is that higher education is inadequately funded. It's inadequately funded. And there are a lot of universities that have gone into their own savings, however you want to phrase it, to be able to, for instance, with the NSFAS funding, for instance, is never enough. In an institution like Rhodes, it's not enough. And the institution puts its own money to be able to bring the numbers up, to be able to match, to be able to grow the number of students who have access into higher education. So I think having many different disciplines around the table, people are saying, okay, so financially, okay, economics tells us 1, 2, and 3, and if we go down this road, this is where we'll end up. Ultimately, hard choices are going to have to be made. I mean, I look at my own institution, there are a lot of cuts that have to be made, but at every cut you make, you understand that there's a consequence to it. However, I think it's really problematic when we stop the conversation with the line, we can't afford it. Well, actually, not just financially, we can't afford it as a system, as a nation. We just can't afford to continue as we are.
So, Manny, there's clearly still a lot of dissatisfaction among South African students. What do you foresee? I mean, this is clearly not the end of this movement. I mean, what's next? What's around the next corner? When will it end, or when will any sort of resolution take place?
I don't know if there's an end in sight, but there might be an end in sight in terms of the actual physical protesting. But I think what has happened, what I've noticed is what it's unleashed is people saying right there and then, I'm not going to wait until 3 months down the line to say that this curriculum honestly does not speak to the title that you have for this course and what you teach me are not congruent, or it doesn't actually incorporate everybody else in this classroom or other ideas from other spaces. There's not only one way of understanding what knowledge is and what knowledge counts. We can debate it, but if it's not even brought into the classroom. So I think it'll unleash that where students and staff are able to say, right now, we're not going to wait for a review only. We have to be able to find ways in which to bring these issues to the fore in a way that is going to be constructive. So I don't know if I'm really not sure that this is the last end of national student protests, but I also know that that's not what students actually want. But if in no other ways are we as a sector, as a system listening, that's where we may lead to. But there's a lot of work to be done. There's not a lot of work in terms of how our national ministry reacts to what we have in the program. It also happens to each management system in each university, how they respond and engage with students. It also happens in the classroom. It happens in departments. There are many facets that need to all at the same time keep moving. But I think it's a huge mistake to think, sure, that's over, we're done with. It's not. Now is the real work. Now is the real work that we actually have to do.
And a final question, a term you used earlier, sounded very interesting, cultural capital, how you haven't found the Rhodes environment alienating because of the cultural capital you came with. Explain what that means.
Well, initially, I talk about this in the chapter. Initially, for instance, for the cultural capital that I walk in. First of all, I don't teach undergraduate, so that people are quite clear. I don't teach undergraduate courses. I actually teach the lecturers. But I was a warden. For those of you who have ever been in a warden system, I was a warden. So standing in front of students, the way I speak, my accent gives me access. my middle class cultural capital, not economic capital, are the ones that are aligned with the ones that are experiencing.
Is that based on like the kind of sort of secondary schooling you've had?
Yes, the secondary schooling I've had, primary schooling I've had, but also the practices in my home, how my family has understood what education is, and therefore the practices around within the family are going to be prepared me and my siblings for education, so that it's not this huge big thing that we don't understand. Not to say that necessarily was an A student, but there are ways in which behaviors and things that I need to do in order to be successful here were not so alien from what my ways of being in terms of my schooling, in terms of my home practices. That's in essence what I mean.